Some examples will show the types of arguments one can find in the critical apparatus of a classical text and how wide a range they cover. Which types will appear in any given apparatus and their relative prevalence there will depend on a variety of factors, including the editor's policies, the house style of the series in which the edition appears, and the nature and transmission history of the work being edited. I've taken most of my examples from the Oxford Classical Text series to minimize the confusions that can arise in comparing apparatus entries of different styles. The simplest sort of note reports variants whose distribution enables the editor to reconstruct an archetype and arrive at a printable text. In a tradition with 3 branches, for example, such as that of Vegetius's Epitoma Re Militaris, the agreement of 2 branches against the 3rd will give you the reading of the archetype. Here, epsilon, beta, and delta represent the heads of the 3 principal families of the tradition. The editor, following the agreement of epsilon and beta, prints per scribam. The variant de scribam in delta is an innovation. This note offers both an explanation of the reading in the text, the editor follows the archetype, and evidence relevant to the overall assessment of the editor's stemma. As will become clear as we proceed, the spatial compass of apparatus notes is usually reduced by the omission of things that can be assumed, such as the omission of scribam here, which I've restored as a pink ghost on the screen. Such omissions, even when standard, add to the challenges facing the apparatus reader. Note, too, that the editor assumes that the reader will identify per in per scribam as a prepositional prefix, and infer that the variant de has the same function. That is, the editor assumes that the reader will plug in scribam after de, not the sequence of letters that follows the e in per scribam. The underlying policy is stated in general terms in the preface. I assume that the reader knows some Latin and expects the scribe to have written a Latin word, not a monstrosity. Der scribam would count as a monstrosity. Fonts, too, are part of the apparatus code. Roman font, red on the screen, is used for words belonging to the text. Italic font, blue on the screen, is used for words or symbols contributed by the editor. If a reconstructible archetype has an unacceptable reading, the editor may want to explain why that reading has been discarded and/or what has taken its place. That is what is going on in the following note, again from Vegetius. By the same 2 out of 3 logic applied above, we infer here that the archetype was the source of imbuuntur in epsilon and beta. Imbuuntur being what you get if you add the standard ending untur to the variant listed as imbuu hyphen. But the Latinity of imbuuntur is dubious, since the expression is only paralleled by other doubtful passages listed in the reference work cited in the note, the TLL or Thesaurus Linguae Latinae. The reading in delta, imbibuntur, which the editor prints, is an innovation of some sort, but it's acceptable Latin. The editor of Vegetius does not justify his preferred reading here, except by showing the argument against the archetypes imbuuntur. But you will find notes with explicit justifications, such as this one in the newest OCT of Apuleius's Metamorphoses. This looks like a note about the word proprio, but it in fact applies to proripio, which is the word in the text of 423 that most closely resembles proprio. This example also illustrates a very common form of apparatus shorthand. The editor assumes that you will look for the apparent lemma, the note's first word in the text, and that if you can't find it there, you'll infer that the note applies to whatever looks most like the apparent lemma. The note tells us that the text's proripio is misspelled as proprio in the manuscript F, which is the archetype of this tradition. It's rare that the manuscript that is the source of the other extant manuscripts survives. The note also tells us that the word is spelled correctly in 2 descendants of F, A and U. The correction was presumably made independently by each, since it does not appear in other descendants of their common parent in a generation between themselves and F. The existence of this parent and these siblings is demonstrated in the edition's preface, but not mentioned in the note. The editor's comment cor, in green on the screen, an abbreviation for cor exerunt, explains the genesis of the reading in the text. It is a spelling correction made by 2 medieval scribes. However, cor exerunt may also provoke the reader to question the editor's explanation. If, for example, she feels that proripio is not a plausible correction for proprio, especially not one that would have been made twice, she may start looking for another explanation. A very common type of note that requires considerable mental effort from the reader arises when each branch of a two-branch tradition preserves a construable reading from the archetype. The two branches in theory have equal authority, so how does the editor choose? Consider the following note from the OCT of Columella's Res Rustica. Here, S and A, that is to say the agreement of these two manuscripts, and R represent the two branches. Both relinquendi and retinendi suit the context, which is about the honorable acquisition of wealth. The question is, once the wealth has been acquired, is the next step passing it on to your heirs, which would be the point of relinquendi, or holding onto it for yourself via retinendi? Here, the editor prints the reading that is more likely to be authentic because it is less likely to have arisen as an innovation from the other or from some common original. No explanation is given or needed, so long as it can be taken for granted that the reader will understand the principle of the lectio difficilior to be at work here. This is an editorial rule of thumb asserting that of two readings with equal manuscript authority, the more difficult reading, the lectio difficilior, is to be preferred, on the grounds that it's more likely to be authentic, or rather less likely to have arisen from scribal innovation. In our passage, the variant retinendique simplifies the phrase, since it doesn't require one to infer an indirect object, as relinquendique does. So the editor prints relinquendique and leaves it to the reader to activate the relevant argument. Similarly challenging is the related scenario in which one branch of a two-branch tradition preserves a correct reading, while the other goes astray, but one or more of its constituents retrieves the correct reading. We can see this in a note pertaining to Macrobius's Saturnalia, where the two families are headed by alpha and beta. The word before the square bracket, docte, is what the editor prints. This note states explicitly that beta read te, and armed with the knowledge, if we've read the edition's preface, that this tradition has two branches, we infer that docte is the reading transmitted by alpha. In beta, it has been corrupted to te, which makes no sense in the text. But recte V, meaning V has it right, tells us that the scribe of V, which is a descendant of beta, has recovered docte, either by conjecture or by contact with the family of alpha. Now these two explanations, conjecture and contact, have very different implications for the transmission history of this text. So the note is a piece of the evidence necessary for evaluating the editor's account of that transmission. A different sort of challenge for the reader arises when a variant that needs reporting comes from an external source. Thus, the editor of the Saturnalia informs us that both Macrobius and Aulus Gellius quote Caesar's famous dictum about avoiding unusual words as one would a reef, but that they use different Latin words for unusual. This note tells us that the archetype of the Macrobian tradition transmits the lemma infrequens, but also that infrequens might not be right.